There we go. Did you do it or did it auto?
Auto.
Good. Hello, welcome in. We're going to get started in just a few minutes and give folks a little time to land. But in the meantime, if you want to enter into the chat window, what you're here to learn about, what you're excited about, or where you're joining us from, we'd love to hear from you.
Welcome, everyone. As Connor said, until we get started, it'd be lovely if you can put in the chat where you're joining us from and your name and what you're excited to learn about tonight.
And if it isn't already set to it, make sure your chat is set to like all attendees or everyone so that we can all see it. And we'll get started in probably like 2 minutes, 3 minute stops. No need to be shy.
Yeah.
Maybe you're someone who's got a lawn and you're not really sure where to start on going water-wise, or maybe you're not convinced you want to go water-wise. Maybe you've got really specific questions about plant types or irrigation or something.
Be simple and let us know where you're joining from. I'm currently joining us from Petaluma.
Maybe our chat setting is not enabled or something. I see a hand up. It should be fine. If the chat is not working for you, maybe you could try the Q&A function. Or maybe folks just don't feel like sharing, and that could be okay too. All right, chat disabled. Interesting.
Got it.
Emily, do you want to try working on troubleshooting that?
Yes, I'll work on that.
Thank you. Sorry about that, folks. Well, in that case.
Okay, well, it should really quickly, it should be fixed now. Can somebody try to drop something in the chat and see if that works?
All right, excellent.
Great.
Thank you, Katie. All right, well, here, free to go through some introductory slides to share in the chat what you're excited to learn about, where you're joining from, or anything else you feel called to share. Hi, Lucerne. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here and taking time to share your evening with us for this presentation on water-wise gardens and landscapes, brought to you by us, Daily Acts, and the City of Santa Rosa. Yeah, we're appreciative that you are interested in saving water, and we hope to teach you about that and some other exciting stuff. So for anyone who's not familiar, I want to talk a little bit about Daily Acts. My name is Connor Devane. I'm the Senior Climate Resilience Programs Coordinator here. So Daily Acts is an environmental education nonprofit based in Petaluma that inspires transformative action that creates connected, equitable, and climate resilient communities. So the shorthand of that is we're trying to build communities that take care of each other and the planet. We believe in the power of our daily actions to reconnect people to themselves, to their communities, and to the ecosystems they live in. So our department does that by empowering communities with low cost, low tech, and people-powered solutions for living rich and full lives that have a positive impact on the environment. And we do that primarily through events like this one, which are educational presentations, but also hands-on workshops doing things like installing rainwater harvesting systems or gray water reuse systems, or converting people's water-thirsty turf lawns into water-wise gardens, which is what we'll be talking about this evening. So I don't know about, for those of you in the audience, this is my first time in a long time doing a presentation on Zoom. So forgive any rusty stuff going on, but in case you've forgotten, the best way to ask your questions, just so that they don't get lost in the shuffle, as I'm not really going to be checking the chat during the presentation, is to punch them into the Q&A box. And Emily's going to be keeping an eye on that for us during the presentation, and she may answer some of those questions in the moment, but otherwise we'll save them for the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. And then the chat box is definitely still available to you. That's a great place to interact with other people in the audience or to share resources that come up to you. Maybe I'm talking about a plant list that I like, and you've got one you want to recommend and share with the group, and that's always welcome. Just always be respectful. All right, so I want to express gratitude to Santa Rosa Water and the City of Santa Rosa for making this program possible, and I'm excited to share a couple messages from them. The last few, a lot of the webinars we've done with Santa Rosa, these slides are more about the drought situation. So it's exciting to be able to share some good news, which is that the water supply in our local drinking water reservoirs, Lake Sonoma and Lake Mendocino, have recovered after reaching historically low levels following 3 years of severe drought. In November of 2022, Lake Sonoma actually hit its lowest level in recorded history, and now the reservoirs are full. And I think that's maybe a typo on the photo and should say April 20th, 2023. But on behalf of Santa Rosa Water, happy to pass along this message of gratitude, which I would repeat from the perspective of Daily Acts as well, which is just to thank you for saving water. And share that Santa Rosa City Council has now rescinded the city's water shortage emergency that was back on March 14th of this year. That emergency had been in place since June 29th of 2021. So kind of fitting after this morning's rain that we at least had in Petaluma to share this good news. And the City of Santa Rosa is thankful to our community for working together to achieve water savings during this water shortage emergency, and for everyone's continued efforts to be water smart. And just want to point out that the Santa Rosa community responded really beautifully to the drought emergency and reduced water use by 18%, saving 1.8 billion gallons of water, which is pretty impressive. That being said, no matter how much rain we're getting, there's really never enough to waste. Water is life. It's precious. We need to treat it with respect and use it responsibly. So just a gentle reminder that there is a water waste ordinance in the city of Santa Rosa and most of, if not all of California. So make sure you're paying attention to any sort of breaks, leaks, or excess water use. We need to be in compliance with that ordinance. And the city offers some really great resources and rebates to support you in your efforts to conserve water and in many cases reuse water. I'm going to talk in a little more detail about some of the rebates on the next slide and again at the end of the presentation, but the city has a long-standing commitment to water use efficiency, and throughout that time has built up a pretty robust bevy of programs like rebates and incentives. They offer support to residential and commercial customers, including things like free hardware and educational programs, and tools like the Water Smart Yard, which provides weekly watering recommendations for your landscape. And I'm regretting in this moment not having a slide about that, because it's a really cool resource that I will include in our follow-up email that can tell you, based on where you live in the Sonoma water system, kind of how much you should be running your irrigation and when. It's pretty magnificent. They update it, I think, every week. Yeah, so one of those rebates, or two of those rebates I want to call attention to. I'm going to talk in more detail about Cash for Grass at the end of the presentation, but the city offers up to $1,000 for residential customers one time. So it's $1 per square foot of irrigated and maintained turf lawn into WaterWise landscape. And that doesn't include things like hardscape, but again, a little more detail later. And then there's also an irrigation efficiency upgrade up to $300, and that can cover a bunch of different things. The city has great information for that on their website, which is the Water Smart Center. You can see the link here on the screen. We'll include this link in the follow-up. You can also call them at 707-543-3985 and set up like a home visit. They can sort of, whether they're doing those pre-inspections for a rebate you're hoping to get, or just kind of help you figure things out about your water usage. They have a lot on offer, and you can get all those details on that website. So thanks again to the City of Santa Rosa and Santa Rosa Water for all that they do, including supporting our work and making this program possible. So with that, I'm going to look at the bulk of the presentation for tonight. So we'll start out with some context about why it's important to go water-wise. Some of it's obvious, some of it may be new to you. We're going to talk about the connection between soil and water, about the process of getting from a turf lawn or whatever you currently have in your landscape to a water-wise garden, including some design considerations and how to choose the right plants for the right place. And then very briefly, we'll be covering a little bit about drip irrigation, and just a little disclaimer that this is pretty broad. Any one of these topics that we're covering tonight, we could spend hours on in and of themselves. And just to uplift that, a lot of the things that you may be wanting more detail on this evening, we do have many recorded webinars on those specific topics, as well as some literature, written resources that you can find on our website, and that we can also share out some of in a follow-up. And as I said in the beginning, we're going to save ample time at the end for any questions you have that Emily and I will do our best to answer. And if not, we'll point you to the right resource or the right person who can answer them for you. So here we are, planet Earth, or as I like to call it, planet water. We all know that water is life, right? We can't have life without water. And you may know that the amount of water that exists on Earth is pretty much exactly the same as it always has been. But the phase and the chemistry of it changes, as we can see just in this picture, right? We've got liquid water, there are ice caps, there's water vapor in the form of clouds, there's humidity, all kinds of different things. There's also fresh water and there's salt water. And that's an important one because, you know, as you're probably aware, we are entirely reliant on the availability of fresh water. So if we can travel back just for a moment to maybe 4th, 5th, or 6th grade, when you probably first saw an image like this, to look at the global water cycle. So it's always good to be reminded of the way that water cycles through the Earth's systems to understand the importance of things like saving water and certain ways of doing it that are maybe better than others. So if you ask most people what the global water cycle is, they'll probably at least capture this part here. Let me get a little laser pointer going, where water evaporates from the ocean, it moves over land as clouds and water vapor, it condenses into rain, it falls. Some of it runs off, rejoining the ocean. Maybe people will tell you that some of it infiltrates into groundwater, into aquifers. But that's only really part of the picture. And a big piece here is that water also evaporates from on-land sources and transpires or evapotranspirates from plants. And the key takeaway of all this is that human activities over many thousands of years, along with the changes that we're experiencing to our climate that result from some of those activities, have changed and are continuing to change the way that water moves through this cycle. And that looks different in different places. So in most of the world, we're seeing less infiltration into groundwater. And depending on circumstances, we might be experiencing increased evapotranspiration or decreased. We might be seeing decreased rainfall, or we're seeing the same amount of rainfall, but it's coming less frequently and in more intense storms. We're seeing ice and snow melting, increasing runoff, which can erode soil and sort of compound the problems. And all of this can even change the balance of fresh water and salt water as the journey of water speeds up from the top of a watershed out to the ocean. And this is important because if you think about our groundwater as like a bank account, right? When we are in a drought, we are only pulling money out of our bank account, right? Through wells and so on. We're not putting anything back in. And then when we're having a situation where we're not having good groundwater infiltration, we're getting the income, but we're just spending it, right? We're not depositing into the bank account. So our reserves or our savings are getting depleted. And why is that happening? So aside from just the impacts of global heating and climate change, a huge piece of this puzzle is that the ways we've altered landscapes, watersheds, and waterways has, as I mentioned, dramatically changed the way water moves through them. So things like paving over large swaths of land and straightening water courses like rivers, creeks, and streams, draining wetlands, deforesting lands. These things change the surface of the land, and so water moves more quickly through them and doesn't infiltrate as well. And this interesting example that I'm borrowing from Jesse Savo, who is a local rainwater harvesting expert who runs the company Blue Barrel Systems and has presented with us in the city of Santa Rosa in the past. We look at, in the case of a natural ground cover, so say like a forest or the Laguna de Santa Rosa, where it isn't developed, we see a good percentage of water gets, it evapotranspirates into, or evapotranspires into the air. And then about 50% is infiltrating either in a shallow way into groundwater or deeper into aquifers, right? And then maybe 10% is running off into waterways. Whereas in a developed landscape, where there's over 75% impervious ground cover, so things like streets and buildings and so on, but also really compacted soils, we see those numbers change pretty dramatically, and more than half of the water is running off. And this is a topic I could spend an hour and a half talking about alone, so I'll try to keep it real brief here and move on. But when water runs off and doesn't infiltrate, there's sort of a vicious cycle of impacts that exacerbates drought and exacerbates flooding. So these are things we really want to avoid. And just to kind of drive it home, knowing that this is not what Sonoma County looks like, but a natural or undeveloped landscape, I should say, versus a heavily developed and impervious landscape. If we start to think about the earth as a living body, not unlike our own bodies, the importance of fresh water to the proper functioning of the earth systems becomes pretty clear, right? Like imagine you trying to run a marathon when you've only had like 2 sips of a water bottle. It would be very, very difficult. And it's no different for the earth, right? Its respective systems, the earth and its respective systems have been dehydrated through to those changes to the earth's hydrology. So this is a design problem, right? Like these are consequences of how we've designed the built environment. The good thing, we can design to solve that same problem in order to rehydrate the earth. And where better to start with that than our own home landscapes? Because that's where we have the most agency. And it's also kind of a manageable scale. Like for me, if I'm trying to think about how do we rehydrate all of California, that's a little bit overwhelming. But if I've got, a front yard, whether it's 100 square feet or it's an acre, that's a little bit more manageable. So just really quickly, this really wonderful set of images from Brad Lancaster of harvestingrainwater.com. On the top left here, we've got a pretty standard example of, your like urban suburban lot, which is convex, right? Like it's higher up than the road and it's sloping down in order to sluice water away from the house. And it channels it into the road where it enters the storm drain. And that journey, like I talked about, through the watershed of water as it falls as rain to, say, in our case, the Laguna or the Russian River, has become shortened. And what we can think of that as pump, pipe, pave, and pollute. That's sort of the old or the current water paradigm. And what we want to move to in order to rehydrate the earth, or even just our front yard, is to slow, spread, sink, and store the flow of rain across the landscape. So in this example, you can see we're catching water off the roof into a rain tank or a cistern. And when that overflows, it goes into a depression, a basin that waters this tree. We've got rain gardens where water flows into a depression intentionally on the land rather than rushing away. And in this example, we're actually pulling runoff from the street into vegetated areas with soil where it can absorb and infiltrate that water. So that doesn't necessarily have to be our goal, but it is a good sort of goalpost to keep in mind of how much water can I keep on site instead of rushing it off. Not a great place to start though. So maybe first we should talk just about turf lawns and why you might want to get rid of yours. So one obvious answer that you probably already thought about is that water is relatively costly and turf grass is thirsty. It uses a lot of water. Saving water means saving money. That's a great reason. But there are also many more that you might want to consider. So one is that maybe not quite to the extent we're seeing in this picture, but in some cases, sure, turf grass or lawn has pretty short roots. They don't extend very far down into the soil. And so once you have water infiltrating past the depth of those roots, the plants can't access it anymore. So that's water that's lost. So unless you're very, very particular about and meticulous about how you run your sprinklers, you're probably losing a lot of water just to infiltration that your grass isn't actually getting. Another important note that we'll come back to in a slide or two after this, is that the shallow roots of turf are often associated with compacted soil because those roots aren't breaking up the soil down below maybe 4 to 6 inches. So we talked about why that's bad for runoff, but there's more to it than that. One other reason you've probably experienced as well is that sprinklers are not especially efficient, and that's kind of the standard way of watering a turf lawn. So I'm sure you've seen instances of overspray or where, you know, somebody is not barely even watering their lawn. They're mostly watering the driveway, and maybe there's even weeds growing up through the cracks in the driveway or the sidewalk. So they're wasting a bunch of water, and they're also contributing to pollution because, you know, there's motor oil in your driveway and you water it and it runs off into the street, into the creek, through the storm drain. Just not good all around. And of course, you know, we live in Sonoma County, California, and most of what people use for turf lawns is what we call a cool season turf grass. Well, we don't have a cool season for about half the year. We get pretty hot here, and this is what happens during those times. And frankly, it looks pretty crappy when you have this sort of parched, crispy lawn. I'd rather see that than a deeply green lawn in the middle of summer, just because that means that you're not using water to keep it alive. But, you know, there are other options we could have that look good through the summer and have all these other co-benefits that we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so. Okay. So I talked about the compacted soil with turf grass. Soil is critically important for everything, but one aspect is its role in water retention. And so this is a quote from Tori Estrada of the Carbon Cycle Institute, that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, which is a key indicator of soil health, an acre can store an estimated 20,000 gallons of additional water, which is about as much as the average American swimming pool holds and not much less than a whole inch of rain on an acre. So if you can increase it by a little bit over 1%, every inch of, like, you get an inch of rain and that's one more inch that is stored, and that's over 20,000 gallons, which is quite a lot of water. And we're not going to go into detail on this, but if you've never looked into the soil food web, I encourage you to just punch that phrase into your favorite search engine. Soil is the basis of most life on Earth, the exception being like marine ecosystems, right? Healthy plants need healthy soil, and turf grass offers very little to support soil health. Healthy soil needs proper moisture, it needs aeration and nutrient flows. On top of that, plant diversity can boost soil diversity, and soil diversity helps plant diversity, and they have this sort of virtuous cycle impact that as you increase one, the other comes along. So let's say you're convinced. You're like, you didn't even need to tell me all that. I came here because I want to get rid of my lawn. Or maybe hearing something about the water savings has got you a little more on board. Let's talk about how to go from a lawn to a water-wise landscape. Technically, you could rip the lawn out. You could scrape the site, or you could take, like a hoe or a tiller and rip the grass out. But that's really not the preferred way to do it, because those tactics will disrupt your soil health. Even if your turf lawn hasn't really done much to boost the health of your soil, it's really just all the more reason not to disrupt what's already there. So sheet mulching is a method of composting your lawn in place, and it improves soil quality. It helps reduce water use. It'll save money through that process of water conservation. And it provides you with a sort of a blank slate to plant the landscape that you want, that will use less water and have all these other wonderful benefits. So I'm going to go through the steps of how to sheet mulch, but I'm going to move through it fairly quickly because this is one of those topics that I mentioned at the beginning. We've got whole webinars on this topic. We've got written resources, videos, whatever you need, and we can send some of those out in the follow-up email. So sheet mulching basically is, well, first let's talk about tools, actually. These are just our recommended list of tools. You can certainly do it with fewer tools than this, or if you've got preferred tools that aren't on here. Basically, you need something you can dig with, stuff to move material. At the end of the day, that's what it is. On top of tools, you'll want really just three kinds of materials. So you got recycled cardboard. You can either buy rolls of recycled cardboard at like soil product stores. I'm sure there's some other places that sell the rolls. They're really easy to use, but they can be expensive, especially compared to your other option, which is to use boxes that you've collected from things you bought, or go to somewhere like Costco or a bike store. An appliance store is good. Or even like an auto body shop, where they'll have like really large boxes of cardboard that they'll usually just give you for free. One note about the cardboard is you want to, as best as you can, avoid things like tape and glues. And if you can, even inks, just things that you think might harm the soil life beneath the cardboard. You'll also need some organic complete compost that you can also find at either any of the soil product purveyors around Sonoma County, or there are often free compost giveaways through our county agency, Zero Waste Sonoma. Daily Axe is often running some of those. And lastly is arbor mulch, which is kind of a fancy term for shredded tree material. It's not quite wood chips because they're irregular shapes and sizes, which helps a lot with soil life diversity, just having that diversity in shape and rate of decomposition. Arbor mulch, fairly cheap if you buy it, but you can also usually get it for free if you can track down an arborist or using the service Chip Drop. Most people who work on trees are eager to get rid of this really magic material they've got. So moving right along, just to give you a brief look at the steps. The first one is to create an edge against any hardscape. And this is basically just digging like a wedge shape so that the cardboard rolls into it real nice. And also, because like we talked about, most of our landscapes are convex and are higher up than something like a sidewalk or a driveway, you add a few more inches of material there, and now you're much higher. We don't want to be spilling mulch all over those surfaces, and the edge will help with that. Next, you're going to have to deal with the sprinkler system that you've got in place. There are a few different things you can do. You can cap it entirely and switch to hand watering or not watering if you're using like very low water use plants and you plant before the rainy season. There are also a few ways you can convert to drip, which I'll talk about at the end. If you're going to preserve any of that infrastructure, just be really careful when you're digging, because shovels and PVC pipe are not very friendly together. They don't play nice. Step 3 is to cover the site with cardboard. So this is like our weed barrier. This is what's going to kill the grass and compost it in place and turn it into organic matter to boost our soil health rather than undermining it. You may also want to lay down a 1-inch layer of compost before the cardboard just to really get that soil health rocking. Some important notes are you want your cardboard to overlap by about 6 inches just to make sure there's no light getting through. And you want to go at least 2 layers thick. If you're using boxes that are really heavy duty, you might be able to get away with 1, but just know that if you go thinner, you may have to do it again sooner. Whereas if you go thick, you might get away with not having to do it ever again. You just replenish mulch. You can also use newspaper here. Just avoid the glossy stuff and go like 5 layers thick or more with the newspaper. All right. I get a last note is that if you're doing this on a windy day, especially, you'll want to like wet down the cardboard as you go or throw some compost on top of it. You may need some heavy stuff like tools or rocks to hold it down so it doesn't blow away on you. That can be kind of frustrating. So once you've got your cardboard down, we're going to do another or first layer of compost, typically 1 inch. Adding 2 is certainly not going to hurt anything. This will really help with that decomposition process or the composting of your lawn and add more of that organic matter to retain water. And it also holds down the cardboard. And this is why we do compost on top of the cardboard. The biggest complaint that I ever hear about sheet mulching is just when people have exposed cardboard, they don't like how it looks. So if you're putting your arbor mulch right on top of the cardboard, the chances of it sliding away and exposing the cardboard are a lot higher than if you do compost on top. And then your last step here is to spread your mulch. And we recommend 3 to 4 inches. If you're in a really fire prone area, the sort of best practices for fire resilience are to do just 2 inches of mulch, but you won't get quite the same water retention benefits. If you're working around trees, you can go as thick as 6 inches, but it's important not to pile mulch up against any of the trunks or stems of your plant, just because mulch is so good at holding on to water that if it's directly touching your plants, it can cause issues with spreading pathogens. So we want to avoid that if we can. Another fun note about mulch is that when it's hot out, mulch can help keep your soil from getting too hot. And when it's cold out, mulch and compost can help retain some warmth for your soil. So these are all good things. And then of course that helps suppress unwanted plant growth. So, any of those, most of those weeds that are buried down there with your grass are now under so much material and not having access to sun and light that they're going to be a lot less successful at growing through. And that's not to say this is a foolproof method. You're still going to have to do some hand pulling of weeds here and there, but dramatically less than if you skipped the cardboard altogether. One caveat there is Bermuda grass. So I know a lot of you here have Bermuda grass because I've been all over Sonoma County and I see it all over the place. This is a very tenacious plant. It is really, really good at doing what it does. It grows very well and it grows through its rhizomes, which means the roots that grow underground can sprout new plants. So you like pull one and then it sprouts out elsewhere. So there are ways to deal with this. You can just sheet mulch over it and just for seeing to pull. There are some other things you could do like solarization, which is a process of using UV resistant plastic during the hottest months of the year. And it really only works if you get quite a few hours of direct sun. This basically uses the moisture under the plastic and the heat from the sun to cook the roots to death. You could dig out as much of the rhizomes as you see, but that's a very tall order because they spread very efficiently. And then worst case, if you've got really atrocious case of Bermuda grass and you don't have the ability or the budget to do regular maintenance, you could scrape the site. Obviously, this is going to do a number on your soil's health, but if you are backing it up with sheet mulching and years of good care, it'll benefit you in the long run. I consider it as kind of a last resort, I should say, but it is an option available to you. So I think of this as prepping the canvas for the landscape that we're going to design, or like the plant painting you're going to create, if you will. So there are some important questions you want to ask. For me, looking at a blank canvas is kind of intimidating. That's like, looking at a blank piece of paper and thinking, oh, what should I draw? I don't know. The possibilities are kind of endless. So 2 good starting points from where I sit. The first one is to ask, what plants want to grow here? What's grown here historically? You might think about like what would be growing here potentially if your neighborhood was never built, if this was an ecosystem that had never been disturbed and it was just, left alone to do its thing. What sort of plants would be growing here? And you can look to areas that have sort of natural plant growth near you happening and see what those ecosystems look like, see what kind of plants are in them. To help answer that question, there are a lot of things we can look at. I'm going to hit these as a quick list, but just a reminder again for our resources on our website. We've got recordings of webinars that are just about garden design, and they will talk about all these things in detail. It's really important to know your soil type and your drainage. There's some plants that really love sandy soil that will not be happy if you've got super clay heavy soil, and vice versa. You can look into your USDA zone and your sunset zone just by punching your address, your zip code into any number of free tools on the internet, and go from there to look at plant lists or take that to a nursery. Most of the things that would be sold at a nursery here are going to be compliant with these zones, but you might be surprised what they have that isn't. You'll want to think about how much sun you get and where. Plants that are, used to the deep redwood canopy are not going to be happy in the full exposed sun. You want to think about how water moves through the site. Do you have places where it pools naturally? Similarly with wind and things like microclimates. So like say you've got an area where you've got a big concrete patio and it's got a south or west facing exposure and big reflective windows, it might be really hot there. And that might be an opportunity to plant something like a citrus tree that will appreciate the extra warmth. And then of course, physical constraints, things like property lines, hardscape, external structures. You don't want to plant a massive oak tree right under the eaves of your house or a garage or something like that. So once you have a sense of what wants to grow here, that's a really great place to be operating from, but we don't have to be entirely limited to that, because it's also important to think about what you want to grow there. This is the landscape that you are the steward of, and you're also going to be like the primary enjoyer of or benefactor of. So you have to ask yourself, what do you want out of your landscape? Is it a place to relax? Is it somewhere you want to grow food or provide habitat for wildlife and pollinators? Maybe you want somewhere you can sit outside to eat dinner when it's nice out, or somewhere for your kids to play where they can explore the more than human world and meet, frogs and birds and dragonflies and all that. Maybe you just want a garden with curb appeal. There's really not a wrong answer here, and only you can figure out what it is that you want. And that's a great place to be operating from as well. So once you have sort of the abstract vision of what you want, you'll want to consider things like, what colors do you want to see? What shape and size of plants? Are there specific smells you would love to have in your garden? Like maybe jasmine is really nostalgic for you and you love this time of year or in the past month, getting a big whiff of jasmine. And then textures, which I think they're really fun, but especially great for kids. Think about whether you want edible plants, things that have medicinal value, plants that are especially good for pollinators or provide other kinds of habitat for like songbirds. Do you have views you want to preserve, or maybe views you want to block to increase your privacy? So you might do some screening plants. An interesting sort of frame to look at landscape design from is an anchor feature. And again, this is something we talk about a lot in the garden design webinar that we have recordings of. But basically, this is just like a focal point in your landscape, somewhere the eye is drawn. This could be all kinds of different things. It could be a statement tree, or it could be a bird bath, a bench, a specific bed that has really beautiful multicolored flowers. There's a lot there. It could even be a path. But it sometimes helps to have something to design around rather than just how much stuff can I fit onto my blank canvas. And then the last one I want to touch on without opening too big of a can of worms, is additional water saving tactics. So aside from incorporating water-wise plants, there are many things we can implement to conserve, capture, and reuse water in our landscapes. And again, I can't spend much time on these tonight, but just to get some familiarity out there for you, these are things like rain gardens and swales that are ways that you change the topography or the slope of your landscape to intentionally slow, spread, sink, and store water in your landscape. Things like rain tanks that can catch water off a roof, whether it's your house or a shed or your apartment building, if the management's cool with it. And then like gray water reuse, especially something like a laundry to landscape system. Again, something we have tons of resources on, but I just wanted to mention it here because it can be helpful to think through these things before you start putting plants in the ground, because you may decide you have to move things around or rip them out to accommodate these features. By no means does that mean you have to do this first. Don't let it get in the way of converting your lawn, but just something to keep in mind. As you are embarking in your design journey, it can be really helpful to document things. It's not necessary, but especially if you're a detail-oriented person, or if you see yourself working this landscape for many years in the future, it's a pretty invaluable tool to have a base map and any number of iterations of plans, whether it's a planting plan and an irrigation plan, a maintenance plan. Again, keeping it super high level here, but the idea is you have like a living document that starts with just mapping out what's already on site, right? What's the space I'm working with? What plants are already here? Where do I have a lot of sun? Where do I have shade? Where are my windows that I want to make sure I'm not blocking, or where are the windows where I do want shade? Things like that. And then as you move through the seasons and the years, if you're documenting what you plant and then maybe what dies or what you change, what you have to replant, you'll just have this record of what has worked and what maybe hasn't worked so well, so that as you continue making decisions about your landscape in the future, you're always operating from an informed position. And it just, it can help give you a sense of how much you've grown along with your landscape through that journey, which can be very fun. The one on the right here is a really densely planted landscape that we'll see pictures of at the end of the presentation. It does not have to be this tidy or colorful or anything. It's really just whatever works for you. It could be way more detailed than this if that's what you're into. Many people do it that way. So let's talk a bit about plant selection. So now that we've got a sense of what kinds of plants we want, what will grow well here, what we want to grow here, maybe we're really passionate about having an all native garden, or maybe we want to grow as many edible fruits and plants as we can. It's important to have the guardrails of working with water-wise species, especially if you're going for that cash for grass rebate from Santa Rosa, because only very low and low water use plants are eligible. How do you know if a plant is very low or moderate or high water user? University of California, Davis put together this really excellent resource called WUCALS, or Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. We'll include the link to this in the email. This is a really wonderful tool where you can punch in your city or your region, and then operating from there, search by any combination of plant names if you know what you're looking for and you just want to see what the water use is, or you can select into looking at plants that are low water users and then refine that by types of plants like shrubs or small trees. It's really, really helpful and very user-friendly. They also just have lists if that's more your speed. Highly recommend referring to WUCALS whenever you're looking into what plants you should bring into the garden. I personally am a really big fan of using natives whenever I can. So if I've determined there's like a function I want to fill in a landscape, like, oh, I want a small tree that's going to give me something to eat that will also give me afternoon shade to this part of the house or whatever, something like that. If there's a native that can fill those functions, I'm going to prioritize that over a plant that's not native to this area. People talk about natives a lot, and there's this sort of implicit agreement that they're the way to go. But I think it's really useful to talk about why that might be the case and why, from my personal perspective, that usually is the case. And then these are just some examples of beautiful natives. On the screen, we'll look at some of them in more detail in a few slides. But the whole idea of native plants is these are plants that evolved over millennia, and in many cases, literal millions of years, to this region and all that involves, right? So they evolved in partnership, in collaboration, and in competition with all the other species of the region, and also with the climate of the region. So that with predators, with the soil organisms, and with the temperatures and the rainfall patterns. And so this means that they are survivors, right? They've adapted many times and have sort of carved out their role or their niche in the ecosystem. So they can really roll with the punches. They're the best plants, or they're the plants that are best equipped to thrive with the conditions that plants in your garden will experience, even as we are moving through changes in our climate. To some extent, this, it means we should start looking at plants that grow well in slightly warmer, drier regions of California, but still sticking pretty close to home there. So aside from just setting you up for success and typically requiring quite a bit less water, in fact, most natives after 1 to 2 years will be all right with having irrigation turned off. Definitely don't just take my word for that. You want to observe your own plants, and if you turn the irrigation off, keep a close eye on them. But once they're established, they adapted to deal with the rainfall that we get here in Sonoma County. But aside from just being well set up for success, they also offer many, many benefits to pollinators and other wildlife species that also have that long-standing evolutionary relationship. And because they share that relationship with the soil organisms that have evolved here for millions of years, in many cases, they're going to be really, really adept at sequestering carbon compared to plants from other ecosystems. It's not always quite that black and white, but it's a good side to err on. So again, lower maintenance perhaps than plants from other parts of the world, but it doesn't mean no maintenance. You do still have to care for them. So on the note of supporting other wildlife and pollinators, this example, it shows the difference between a native oak and a ginkgo biloba tree, which comparatively supports 537 species of caterpillars to the ginkgo's 4 species of caterpillars. Why do caterpillars matter, right? So aside from, to me, an obvious benefit of like the joy that butterflies can bring in the garden, caterpillars, which are the larval form of both butterflies and moths, are a critically important food source for birds. They offer way more fat than most other things birds will eat in the landscape, like seeds or nuts, insects. So if you're someone who really appreciates having songbirds or other types of birds in your landscape, caterpillars will help bring them in. But even if you don't care too much about the birds, it's important to remember that these organisms are all really crucial links in the food chains that we also depend on. So many insects, including pollinators, many of them are specialists, which means they can only eat specific kinds of foods. So the caterpillars of a pipevine swallowtail butterfly, for example, only eat one plant, and it's the California pipevine, sometimes called Dutchman's pipe. It's a really beautiful climbing vine. It also works as a ground cover, and it has really funky looking flowers that are very cool. And the swallowtail butterflies are beautiful and an important part of the broader food chain. So just one more vote for planting natives from that ecological perspective. So I'm going to walk us through just some of my favorite and Daily Act's favorites native plants, looking at different plant types as we move. So this one, I'm sure you've all seen thousands and thousands of times, the coast live oak. This is a great option if you've got a little more space to work with, as they can grow to be pretty sizable and they live for a very long time. Oaks, very drought resistant once they're established, and they sequester a ton of carbon, provide so much habitat and food to wildlife. And I think it's really nice to have these really elegant evergreen trees in our landscape, especially starting this time of year when we're seeing the hills turn that like tawny yellow or golden brown. There's just like shocks of dark green. I find really visually pleasing. But if you don't have that much space, there are lots of small and medium-sized native trees that are fun to work with. And again, I'm just kind of scratching the surface here. We have lots of great plant lists that we can share out with you after the presentation. But two of my favorites are the California buckeye, which is in full bloom all over the county right now. These really beautiful flower spikes on these pretty fun like palmate leaves. They're fun to watch through all the spring. They're a deciduous tree, so they will be bare in the winter, but a really wonderful habitat plant as well. And then the Western redbud, another deciduous tree, but that has many or multi-season interest. So you've surely seen these around early in the spring, maybe late winter. They put on this like shock of pink, very small flowers along their branches. That just gives some of the early season color that I really appreciate, and I know a lot of other folks do as well. And then once they leaf out, they have these really lovely sort of round heart-shaped leaves here. So something to bring beauty into your garden almost year-round if you consider the bare tree beautiful, which I do. Another fun note about redbud is that they fix nitrogen in the soil. So nitrogen being one of the most important soil nutrients for plants and other soil life. Redbud will help with nitrogen availability in the soil. So having a redbud means likely that you will have other plants, have healthier other plants in your garden because they'll have access to more of the nutrients that they need. Moving down in scale to some shrubs, we've got the coffeeberry. The scientific name here I've got is Frangula californica. Sometimes you'll see it as Rhamnus with an RHA. This is a really beautiful evergreen shrub. It's called coffeeberry because the berries are sort of a coffee color, like dark brown, almost blue-black, but they're not edible to humans, to my knowledge anyway, but great for birds and many insects, as is the toyon. Some people call it toyon. Fun fact about toyon is that the area of Hollywood is named after this plant down in Southern California because the leaves and the berries both kind of resemble the holly plant. So again, not edible for people, but birds love it. And that really gorgeous contrast of red and green in your garden. Both of these can be really great screening plants. They do grow rather large, but there are garden cultivars of coffeeberry, for example, that are more like 4 feet tall and spread wide. You can see really beautiful coffee berries all over the county. Dailyx has a model site in Petaluma at the regional library there if you ever find yourself in that neighborhood, where you can see 2 pretty large and very healthy coffee berries. Couple more shrubs. We've got Cleveland sage. They have these really fun spikes of like flower whorls, this purple, like a light purple, sometimes more of a blue, depending on the variety. They need a little bit of maintenance towards the end of the year or in the early spring, depending on how long you're willing to put up with the spent flowers. You can deadhead the stalks for aesthetics, but you'll definitely want to leave at least some of them for birds who will eat the seeds. Ceanothus, as sometimes called California lilac. There are like dozens of varieties of this plant. It can grow. I was just up in Humboldt 2 weeks ago, and they have like 25 to 30 foot tall ceanothus. The varieties you usually see around here are either like ground cover or anywhere from 4 to 6, 8 feet tall. They have these beautiful blue flowers. Some varieties are a little more purple. Some are fully white. Very water-wise, drought-resistant plants. They have a fun fact about them is that they have a really high saponin content. which means if you like crush the flower between your fingers, it's very soapy. And I've been told that some indigenous cultures here in our area, like the Southern Pomo, would use them as like a soap of sorts, which is kind of fun. One of the earliest things to bloom in the year, like late winter, early spring, important early food source for pollinators. As we get smaller yet, we've got our like herbaceous perennials. This is where most of the really showy flowers come in. They may not live quite as long as your shrubs or your trees, but some of them will live up to as many as 10 years. There are lots of different hybrids and growth habits from different varieties for most of these. So like penstemon, there are ones that are more of a deep purple, and then there are like hybrids you can get that are like red or even black. Just make sure you're paying attention at the nursery. A lot of times those hybrids that were like sort of synthesized in a lab, not a lab, but in a nursery, I should say, are moderate water users rather than low. So just keep an eye out for that. And then like yarrow, for example, you'll find varieties that are essentially a ground cover and have a big spreading habit. And then you'll find some that are mounding and can shoot up flower spikes up to like 3 feet tall. Sticky monkey flower is one of my favorites, and then California fuchsia as well. Just these are really nice ones for adding lots of color into the landscape. Grasses are, in my opinion, one of the most undervalued types of plants in a landscape, with the exception of turf grass, which I think you caught earlier, probably my opinion that they're overvalued. But those that get a little bit more attention and you'll see planted in landscapes around Sonoma County are these slightly more ornamental, like bunch grasses, like deer grass or the many kinds of fescue that we can grow here, as well as rushes like the one here in the bottom. Grasses are really good at sequestering carbon, and they are really important habitat species. You know, I talk to people who seed wildflowers in their garden year after year, and they never get quite the germination that they're hoping for, and they don't get as many flowers as they want. And my advice to those people, and to you, if you're someone who wants wildflowers, is try designing a garden that's modeled after a meadow or a prairie. Because when we go out in the world and we see places where there are lots of wildflowers, they're usually in like grasslands and meadows, places like that. Okay, keep moving along quickly. We're almost through our natives here. So ground covers, these are a really important type of plant, not just if you have a huge yard you're trying to fill space in, but because bare soil is not good for water retention or for soil health. I said earlier, and I meant it, that mulch is a wonderful material, but if I can cover soil with living plants, I want to do that. Just because those living roots will hold on to more water than mulch, and they'll have all those other wonderful benefits to soil health. So ceanothus we talked about a little bit, but just to call out a couple varieties that specifically grow as ground covers. You've got the Carmel creeper, which sometimes has like variegated, almost lime colored leaves. Joyce Coulter is a really lovely one, and Yankee Point. And some of these grow really quickly, and they have sort of web or net-like root systems, so they're great. They can be really good for slopes to control erosion, but they can grow on flat ground really well as well. Yerba Buena, another really excellent native ground cover that can be used as a medicinal tea. It's in the mint family, so yes, it does spread a lot, but not quite as aggressively as like a culinary mint in my experience. And it's known to help with pain relief and nasal congestion and digestive problems such as like IBS. Okay, last one here. We've got, I could have put manzanita on almost any of these slides, except for the grasses, I guess. Grasses and perennials. Manzanita, another one of the earliest bloomers of the year. Excellent habitat plant. And the one thing I would mention about the ground cover varieties like Emerald Carpet or Uva ursi is that they won't have that same like striking smooth red trunk that a lot of people love manzanitas for, but there are plenty of manzanita varieties that do have that. And then we've got Sonoma sage, which is one of the few like locally native salvias. Most of the time you'll see bee's bliss, which is a hybrid of Sonoma sage and we think Cleveland sage. So it's hard to see in this photo, but it's similar to the Cleveland sage where it has like the spike with the sort of whorls of compound flowers. Really lovely. Great for bees, as implied by the name. So that was a bunch about natives. I definitely love native plants and I think they're excellent, but we are not limited to planting with natives. There's many other species and regions of plants that we can work with here in Sonoma County and still be water wise. So you may have heard that we have a Mediterranean climate. And so with that in mind, we can look to other parts of the world that have Mediterranean climates to see what plants grow well there. And then, of course, we always want to check before we bring in a plant from elsewhere that it's not invasive in our region. Looking at the California, Invasive Council. I'll follow up with an email because I'm blanking on the name right now. But so obviously there's the Mediterranean as implied by the name, but there's also areas in Africa and Australia and South America that have a very similar climate to what we experience in Sonoma County. But we're not even limited to those, right? There are plenty of species that have been naturalized and shown to grow well here without being invasive from parts of Asia and other parts of South America, like Brazil. So just trying to offer you tools here to make good decisions, but it's super prescriptive. There is a lot of possibility. So let's look at some plants from climate analogs or that have adapted well to our climate that we like to work with at Daily Axe. Some of these you've probably seen quite a few of out around Sonoma County. We've got Phlomis, which can be this really large evergreen shrub with these long-lasting rounds of yellow flowers that are really beautiful and also have a really delicious nectar in them. You can kind of pluck the flowers out, suck the nectar from the tube, just don't take too many of them. Leave some for the other species. That's a plant as implied from the name from the like Israel-Palestine region. We've got pineapple guava, I believe is from Brazil. This is a really lovely, also evergreen shrub / tree. So typically it's going to grow as a shrub, but the feijoa is really tolerant of pruning, and you can kind of train this plant to most whatever habit you want. And they have these delicious sort of floral perfumey fruits that they grow that many people who grow this plant around Sonoma County don't seem to harvest them. And they just, they pile up on the ground around the plant. But what's interesting is, to me, that's when I know the fruit is ready. So like with an apple, the fruit falls on the ground and I might say, oh, it's probably past its prime. Not necessarily, but with a pineapple guava, when it's on the ground, as long as it doesn't look like it's rotting out, that's a good signal to me that it's delicious and ripe. But I actually prefer to eat the flower petals of the pineapple guava to the fruit. So you can see these little white flowers here. They're sort of like nature's gummies. They're really like supple and sweet and delicious. And then one more. It's a tree, it's a shrub, it depends who you ask. I'd call it a shrub, but the pomegranate is super drought resistant. Generally set a decent crop of fruit, even in a year where it hasn't gotten all that much water, which is pretty lovely. So looking at a few more, some of these you've certainly seen around: lavender and the many types, French, English, Spanish, different flower shapes, different foliage colors. Some are more green, some are more gray, all smell fantastic. We've got hot lip sage with this sort of white and red flowers, small flowers on small leaves. These bloom for a really long time every year, and just one of many, many non-native salvias that grow well in Sonoma County. Some others are like autumn sage or Salvia gregii, of which there are many colors and sizes. And again, just as a reminder, once you branch out from sort of the straight species, just double check the water use, because people get really creative with making garden cultivars and sometimes they hybridize them with plants that need a little more water. And on to ground covers. I love creeping time. I'll show you, we're going to look at a couple examples where we went from lawn to a fully planted and irrigated landscape in a couple minutes here. Time works great as a lawn substitute. It'll take some amount of being stepped on, and when you do step on it, you get this lovely whiff of thyme. Diamondia is another one that people use a lot around here. I personally haven't worked with it, but just because I see it all the time, I included it here. And there's really no way to capture in even an hour and a half if we spent the whole time on it, on the adaptive plants that grow well in Sonoma County. So just kind of sharing these to sort of whet your appetite, and we'll share out some good resources after the fact. Another great thing to do is to just go to a nursery, especially if you can find ones that specialize in native plants. We've got one or two here in the county, and ask them for their recommendations. You know, the people who work there are typically happy to help, and they're usually pretty well informed. Just try to give them something to work with. Don't show up and be like, oh yeah, it has green leaves, I don't know what it's called. Do a little bit of homework, and they'll be more eager to help. So you've got your plants picked out and your sprinklers are capped. Now what? I have heard people refer to drip irrigation as irritation, because if you kind of just go into it bullheaded, you're going to have issues to deal with, and it can be finicky. But the reality, and like, I'm sympathetic to that. I felt the same way for a long time, but the reality is, with just a little bit of homework, this will save you a ton of time, a ton of money, and your plants will be so much happier for it. So unlike other forms of irrigation like sprinklers, drip irrigation can be as much as 90% efficient at having like usable water for plants, because they have a rate of application. And by that, I just mean like the way that water pretty much dribbles out of an emitter like we're seeing here. It just dramatically reduces the chances that water will run off, and also reduces the amount of water that gets lost to evaporation. This is usually going to be combined with mulch, so you're really stacking functions for water conservation and retention. The water goes into the ground slowly, so it doesn't saturate and become too low for your plant roots to access. And then you're ideally designing a drip system so that water goes directly to the root zone. And by that, I just mean where the roots of your plants are, where they can best take up water. So again, this is an almost abusively brief crash course on drip, but just to give you a bit of familiarity, we've got lots of resources we can share out. There's two main kinds at least of drip irrigation. There's point source, which you see a lot. You got like the spaghetti tubing and these little emitters that have all these different flow rates. And you put sometimes one on each side of the plant. That works great for people who are willing to take it on. But for me personally, I'm an inline drip kind of guy. So basically this roll of tubes here has the drip emitter, or where water comes out of, built into it. And they're on either 12-inch spacing or 18-inch spacing. And there are some really easy to follow guidelines for how to lay this stuff out in a way that will hydrate your whole area of landscape. And that's actually the preferred way of doing it, in the way that like contractors and landscape architects are required to design irrigation systems. So if you've got sprinklers and you're moving a drip, there are a couple ways you can convert them. We have a webinar just on this topic, if you can believe it. But one way is to cap all of your sprinklers except for one, using a piece like this, which unscrews and the riser pops out, and this just creates a seal on the sprinkler body so that water can't come out. You could also take the sprinkler out entirely and just use a PVC cap. Just make sure you're using thread tape to make a good seal. And then the one sprinkler that you don't cap, you'll use one of these all-in-one conversion kits that includes a pressure regulator, because drip irrigation uses a different amount of pressure than sprinklers, which need quite a bit more, and also a filter to keep stuff out of the lines and prevent your emitters from clogging. It's very simple. It just attaches onto the sprinkler head, and the filters are inside this T, and you just stick the irrigation lines on either side here, and they grab on. It's pretty fun little tool. And then the other option is to cut the PVC that is bringing water to your sprinklers and install on your existing valve a pressure regulator and filter there. And this is a better pressure regulator and a better filter than what comes in this all-in-one kit. You would potentially have to clean out these filters a lot more often than you might this one, but both are really good and user-friendly options that can sometimes seem intimidating, but are actually super DIY friendly. And on top of the resources that we have to offer, you can always reach out to Daily Acts with questions if you're, or into Santa Rosa Water in the Water Use Efficiency Department if you're having questions or difficulties with that process. So that kind of concludes the information dump, but I do want to walk us through just a couple fun photo examples of conversions that we've done just in the last couple years. So this was a lawn in Cotati that Daily Acts chose through an application process to work with these residents and volunteers to convert a irrigated lawn to a water-wise landscape. So this is right in the beginning of our sheet mulching process. We're laying the cardboard barrier. You can see we've got our mulch and our compost. And then we came back after we let this all compost for a couple months. That's the best practice. If you let everything break down for a little bit, especially if you could do this and go through at least part of the rainy season, that can be great. But it's not necessary. We've also sheet mulched and planted plants on the same day. The only drawback there is, the plants aren't going to get any immediate soil health benefit from the sheet mulching. It'll still be beneficial in the long run. So we came back and we planted this landscape, which these plants are maybe 3 weeks into the ground. So they've grown a little bit, but if you went back here today, it would look different still. So where we had just that monocrop of lawn and this one cherry tree in the back, we've now got an orange tree, a pineapple guava, and an Asian pear. We've got ceanothus and lavender and sages and yarrows. We've got that hot lip sage I was showing you earlier. And so everything's mulched. And just to kind of reemphasize about the anchor features I mentioned, this person knew that they wanted a path. So this is serving as one of our anchor features that draws the eye through the middle of the landscape. And the way that we laid out trees, including this orange or maybe it was a mandarin or tangerine, I don't quite remember, but we'll fill in here and be another really nice anchoring feature. Another fun note is that since the completion of this installation, the neighbors on both sides have followed suit and sheet mulched and planted their landscapes and used the Cash for Grass rebate in Cotati. So there can be this really fun ripple effect or domino effect when you do this, and your neighbors see how wonderful it can be. And one more example here. This was in the town of Windsor. We looked at the planting plan that I made for this one way back at the top of the presentation when we were looking at base maps. So we had these two neighbors who were good friends and they wanted to design the landscape just as one landscape. So we had quite a bit of grass here, some shady areas in the back, and we've got a couple photos from different angles because it's a lot to take in, that we packed so many plants in here because the folks who live there wanted a really dense landscape and we're up for the challenge of the maintenance. We've got bees bliss sage and deer grass. We have fescues that we talked about. Let's see another angle. There's some plants in here that I didn't include in the presentation, like Artemisia, which this variety is not a California native, but it grows well here. And there are native Artemisias or sagebrushes that grow super well in Sonoma County. This New Zealand flax is a very drought tolerant water-wise species, and you would definitely be saving water by including it in your landscape. I personally don't like to design with it just because I see it all over the place, especially in like business parks and things like that. We have this fun little artificial creek, not quite a rain garden, but it's certainly slowing and spreading water that enters into it. And then I mentioned earlier the thyme lawn. So you can see this is pretty thickly covered, and this is all thyme. So it's using a profoundly less amount of water than a turf grass would. We've got a manzanita here, oh, one more note on the manzanitas that I should have mentioned earlier is they grow very slowly. So if you buy a 1 gallon manzanita of a variety that's going to be a 15-foot tall tree, you're going to be waiting a few years until you see a 15-foot tall tree. So just be ready for that. If that's a problem, you're going to want to shell out for a larger plant at the nursery, but the costs add up in that case. Okay, and a couple last notes here. As promised, the cash for grass rebate. Just a couple things I want to highlight there. I mentioned that it's up to $1,000 for residents. This is just once for the account. So even if you've got more than 1,000 square feet, you can't do it 1 year and then go back and get the rebate again. That's not true if it's a commercial property. The commercial rebate is up to 10,000 square feet and it's annually. So if it's a commercial property with tons and tons of lawn, you can kind of stagger it over the years. Another important note is you have to get pre-qualified before you're eligible for the rebate. So don't rip out or sheet mulch your lawn before contacting the city. There are a couple other requirements, but I want to make sure I'm saving time for questions. So I'm going to move right along to my last slide here, which is just key points to take home. There are many, many ways to maximize water conservation and storage in the landscape. Plant choice, having the right plant for the right place is one of the biggest. Using mulch is actually one of the best things you can do to save water. And then using water efficient drip irrigation. And that's, again, just really scratching the surface. There's a lot more we can do. The City of Santa Rosa has rebates to support you, but they've also got lots of educational materials, as do we at Daily Acts. Don't forget that you need healthy soil for a healthy landscape, that natives are wonderful, but there are other options. And then the last one that I cannot underscore strongly enough is that this isn't, a one and done, you put the plants in and you leave them alone. Like there's really a wonderful invitation to be in a relationship with your landscape and observe the magic that happens there. The closer you look, the more that you're going to see. So observe and make adjustments as needed. Make sure you're paying attention to know that if your irrigation is leaking, it happens. Sometimes a gopher comes in and chomps the line. You're going to be hemorrhaging water, and that's not good for anybody. And to enjoy it, right? Don't bite off more than you're ready to chew. You can start small, make the choices as long as they're water wise that are going to lead to you having a landscape that you enjoy, because you're the landscape manager, but you're also the person who's going to interact with it the most. And with that, just thank you all for being here, and it looks like we've had a pretty steady stream of people the whole time. So I appreciate the attention, and I'm happy to take any questions that we have.
Great. Thank you, Connor. That was very informative. I certainly learned a lot. So our first question is from Kelly. And before I start, everybody feel free to drop in any more questions, even if it's very personal to your landscape, because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering the same things. So Kelly asks, should I cover lawn in winter, and how long does it take to make ready for replanting? And how long does it take to kill the lawn?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as is going to be so often the case when talking about living plants and systems, the answer is it depends. So I would say it'd be better to do it now than to wait until winter. If you're willing to have just a landscape of mulch for the next few months. Winter can be a good time just because the rain will help with the composting process. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, you could immediately, but wait 6, or if you really want to only plant one time, you could wait like a year or even 2 for that soil health to really be going. It's kind of up to you. For me, my sort of rule of thumb is 3 to 6 months is usually pretty decent. And then I don't really have an answer for how long it takes to kill the lawn. I think it probably depends site to site. But if you think about just how quickly lawns die if you turn the water off, it's going to be fairly similar if you remove their access to light and oxygen. So it doesn't take a terribly long amount of time.
Cool. And Katie wants to know if sheet mulching will kill poison oak.
Yeah, that's a good question. My short answer is it should. I've actually never tried it, but I mean, all plants are going to need light and oxygen. And poison oak, I mean, poison oak's an amazing plant. Like it can grow in all these different habits and in different conditions. I would think that sheet mulching would kill it, but if it's got like a really woody stem, you're not going to be able to just like pile cardboard on top of it. And kind of a note that would have been helpful to include in my steps is if you can cut all of the vegetation down as low as you can without cutting out the soil, that's going to help with sheet mulching. So I know it doesn't sound fun to get in there with like a weed whacker or a scythe or whatever and cut the poison oak down to the crown of the plant. But if you did that and then sheet mulch, I would be surprised if the poison oak survived it, but also that's a tough plant. So if you try it, please let me know how it goes so that the next person who asks, I can give them an answer.
Yeah, I'm curious too. So if you try that, let us know. And Joanne wants to know if they could put the plants in first and sheet mulch around them.
Yeah, another good question. You definitely can. And in fact, if you're going to put in really big plants, like 5-gallon or even bigger, that's I would recommend doing that. But if you're working with like 4-inch plants or even gallons, you definitely can. But I find it easier to not, to like get the plants at the right height. Because if you put your plants in and then you're adding 5 or 6 inches of material, the mulch will probably spill over and it could damage your young sensitive plants. It could even shade them out in some instances. So it's certainly something you can do, but if you're going to do that, I would leave a kind of decent buffer around the plants initially, just to give them a little room to establish before bringing the mulch in closer.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions? We'll give a few moments to type those out and send them. And if not, that's it for today. Connor, if you want to wrap up after a few moments.
Sure. Well, I've spoken a lot, so unless questions are definitely still welcome. But in the meantime, I would just again reiterate thank you to all of you for joining us and for having interest in growing water-wise gardens. And another thank you to the City of Santa Rosa and Santa Rosa Water for their support.
Thank you so much, everyone. As Connor voiced already, we'll be sending a follow-up email with some more resources in addition to what I was dropping in the chat box. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. All
right. Well, it looks like no questions coming in. People are dropping out. So I think safe to call it there. And again, if a question comes to you 10 minutes from now or 6 weeks from now, shoot me an email and I'll do my best to help you then. And with that, I think let's go ahead and end it. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks again.
Good night, everyone.